When I go looking for who owns ACDC, I expect to find the band. I don't. The masters sit with an Australian company few can name. The trademark sits with a company in the Netherlands. The biggest album the band made was cut in 7 weeks by a singer hired days after the old one drank himself to death. What nobody says is that ACDC never owned the thing everyone assumes made it rich. It got rich anyway. Who owns ACDC? And how did a band that never changed its sound outlast everyone who did? Sydney, 1973. Two brothers from a migrant family, Malcolm Young and his younger brother Angus Young, played their first gig on New Year's Eve at a club called Checkers. They had a third brother who mattered more to the money than either of them. George Young became the band's producer, its business brain, the man biographers call the unofficial sixth member of ACDC. He is the reason this ends up being a story about control. The Youngs recorded for a home label, Albert Productions, run by the Albert family in Sydney. Ted Albert signed them. George and Harry Vander produced the records from the very first sessions. The Youngs wrote and played everything. The recordings themselves belonged to the Alberts. Nobody in the band treated that as a problem yet, because there was no money to fight over. Then, in 1975, an American label came calling. Atlantic Records, through an executive named Phil Carson, offered AC/DC an international deal. By Carson's own account, it was a long one, roughly 15 albums, at about $25,000 an album, one record a year with options. That is not a rich advance. A 15-album commitment at $25,000 a record is a bet on volume, and a bet that this band would keep showing up year after year and keep sounding exactly like itself. This decision looked small at the time. It wasn't. Volume and repetition, year after year, is the shape of the whole fortune that followed. That deal locked in something most bands never get. Bands usually chase the biggest advance they can wring out of a label, take the cash, and hand over years of leverage. The Youngs went the other way. They took a modest check and a long runway, which meant Atlantic had to keep putting out ACDC records to earn its money back, while the Alberts in Sydney kept owning the recordings the whole time. The band traded a fat payday up front for a machine that would pay out for decades. It was one of the smartest deals ACDC would ever sign, and almost nobody saw that at the time. Control showed up in how the Youngs ran the band as a business. They hired managers and fired them the moment the balance of power tipped. Michael Browning built the early machine and was pushed out by the end of the 70s. Peter Mensch came next and was eventually fired too, then went on to co-found Q Prime, one of the biggest management firms in music. Managers were staff. The band belonged to the family, and the family made sure everyone knew it. The same grip ran through the music itself. In the early years, the production duo Vander and Young ran AC/DC's sound from the control room, which meant the people shaping the records and the people who owned the records were the same small circle in Sydney. The band never had to hand creative control to an outside producer chasing a trend. That is unusual, and it is a big reason the sound stayed frozen while everything around it moved. Who owned the recordings, though, would come back to decide where the money went, but that gets ahead of the story. For 4 years, the bet looked slow and sold steadily, but America, the biggest music market on earth, stayed cold. That changed in July 1979 with an album called Highway to Hell. A new producer, Robert John Lange, better known as Mutt Lange, sharpened the band without softening it. Highway to Hell became the first AC/DC album to break big in the United States, reaching number 17 on the Billboard chart. After 4 years of grinding, the volume bet was finally paying off. The frontman was always the one weak point. Every band carries it, and AC/DC ignored the risk the way they all do. On the 19th of February 1980, singer Bon Scott was found dead. The coroner's official finding was death by misadventure from acute alcohol poisoning. He was the voice, the face, the frontman, and he was gone months after the band finally cracked America. The music industry had seen this before. Lose the frontman, and the band usually dies with him. Almost everyone wrote AC/DC off. And the timing is the part that matters for the money. Scott didn't die when the band was broke and unknown. He died the moment America finally opened up, with the catalog about to compound for the first time. In business terms, ACDC had just proven the model, and immediately lost the one person the whole model appeared to run on. If that sounds like the end of the story, it wasn't. Here is where most bands file for grief and disappear. ACDC did the opposite. The band had a matter of weeks to decide whether it still existed, and the clock had started the day Scott died. Within weeks, the Youngs auditioned singers and hired Brian Johnson, a gravel-voiced Englishman from a band called Geordie. His hiring was announced around the 1st of April, 1980, barely 6 weeks after Scott died. The band flew to Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas, and with Mutt producing again, cut a new album in about 7 weeks. They called it Back in Black. Cutting a new record 6 weeks after the singer's funeral was either the bravest or the coldest call in rock history. That album breaks the whole story open. Back in Black is certified 27 times platinum by the RIAA, 27 million copies sold in the United States. It is the third most certified album in American history. Only the Eagles' Greatest Hits, at 38 times platinum, and Michael Jackson's Thriller, at 34, sit above it. And the rest of the catalog certifies right behind it. Highway to Hell is 8 times platinum, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap 7 times, The Razor's Edge 6, and Who Made Who 5. And that number is worth holding on to. The band cut the record that would define it in the worst month of its history, fronted by a singer almost nobody outside Newcastle had heard of weeks earlier. Everything about the situation should have produced a disaster. Instead, it produced the cornerstone of the whole catalogue. And that is the thing worth sitting with. Bon Scott was irreplaceable as a man, and completely replaceable as a hire. The voice everyone thought was the band turned out to be a role the Youngs could recast in 6 weeks. Angus and Malcolm were the asset. What the brothers were really selling was a product that never changed. Same riffs, same voice type, same lightning bolt. A fan in 1980 and a fan in 2020 knew exactly what they were buying. That sameness is the whole business model, and it runs against how the industry usually works. The rest of the industry survives by evolving, chasing the next sound before the last one goes stale. ACDC turned that sameness into an advantage instead. When the product never changes, the frontman is just the person delivering it, and a delivery man can be swapped. That is why losing the most famous voice in the band cost them a grieving period and very little else. There is a reason that sameness matters for the money. A brand that means one exact thing can sell the same product to new buyers for decades without ever discounting it. The Youngs never had to reinvent the band or win back an audience they'd confused with a left turn. They just kept making AC/DC records, and the market kept showing up. That is pricing power most bands would kill for, and it came from refusing to change a formula everyone else would have called stale. The version most people know ends around here, with the triumphant comeback. The part nobody tells is where the money actually goes. If you like watching a business get taken apart to find where the money actually sits, this channel runs one of these every week. Subscribe, and the next money autopsy comes to you. Alright, here is where the AC/DC story gets genuinely strange. If the Youngs were the asset, and the catalog kept selling for 40 years, then the obvious question is who owns it? The answer surprises almost everyone. Start with the master recordings, the actual studio tapes that print money every time a song is streamed or licensed. The band never owned them. From the first session in Sydney, the masters belonged to Albert Productions, the Albert's company. And here is the detail that proves how valuable they are. When the Albert family sold their publishing house, J. Albert & Son, to the German company BMG in 2016, they held the AC/DC catalog back out of the sale. They sold the business and kept the crown jewels. That is what owning the masters looks like. Then there is the publishing, the rights to the songs themselves as compositions. Since 2021, AC/DC songs have been administered worldwide by Sony Music Publishing, under a deal with the Albert's music arm. The word administered is doing all the work there. In plain terms, the Alberts rent the day-to-day management of their catalog to Sony and keep the ownership. Sony runs the collecting. The songs still belong to the Alberts. And then there is the name. The letters AC/DC, the lightning bolt, the trademark itself, are owned by a company called Leidseplein Presse B.V, registered in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. So the music sits with an Australian family. The name is registered to a Dutch company an ocean away. That Dutch company is where a rumor took hold, and it is worth killing on the record. For years, people have claimed ACDC turned up in the Paradise Papers, the 2017 leak of offshore financial files. I checked it. ACDC is not in the Paradise Papers. The famous names in that leak were Bono, Madonna, and Shakira. The Queen in it was the British monarch's private estate, not the rock band Queen, which is most likely where the confusion with ACDC started. What is actually true is narrower and duller. ACDC really does hold its trademark through a Dutch company, but that traces to public corporate filings, not to the leak. So I am not going to repeat the offshore tax claims, because the numbers behind them are not sourced well enough to say on camera. What is documented is simple. The trademark is registered in the Netherlands. Everything past that is unsourced, so it stays out of this video. One more ownership question sits under Back in Black, and it is genuinely disputed. Scott died without a will. Whether his family shares in the royalties of the album released 5 months after his death has never been cleanly settled. Some accounts say his estate holds a writing credit and a share. Brian Johnson has said flatly that Scott's family gets nothing. The two versions do not agree, and I am not going to pretend one of them is settled. What is not disputed is that the man who defined the band's sound was gone before its biggest payday, and that payday carried his replacement's name. So here is the sentence that sums up AC/DC's money. They replaced a dead singer in 6 weeks and made what is, by the RIAA's certifications, the biggest studio album any band has ever released. And 44 years later, it was still adding platinum. Back in Black earned its 27th Platinum Award in 2024. That same year, Thunderstruck became the band's first Diamond-certified single, the first song in the catalogue to cross 10 million. The catalogue keeps paying out on a formula the band locked in 1975 and never touched again. And that machine shows up hardest on the road. The Black Ice World Tour, from 2008 to 2010, grossed $441.6 million across 168 shows, with attendance around 4.9 million. At the time, in 2010, that made it the second highest grossing tour in history, behind only the Rolling Stones' A Bigger Bang, which grossed $558.3 million. And this is where the giant number stops, meaning what it looks like it means. That $441.6 million is a gross box office figure from Billboard's box score. It is the money that came through the turnstiles before promoters, venues, crews, taxes, and everyone else takes a cut. That gross figure is not the band's take-home, and nobody serious pretends it is. The touring did not stop when the lineup fell apart. The Rock or Bust Tour in 2015 grossed $180 million and finished as the second biggest tour of the year. Then the old trap came back around. In 2016, Johnson was forced off the tour by doctors over serious hearing loss. And AC/DC did the same thing it did in 1980. It swapped the singer. Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses stepped in and finished the dates. The drummer, Phil Rudd, was already gone by then too. Members left, got sick, got replaced, and the tour grossed on. Even the man who replaced Scott turned out to be replaceable. When the band came back in 2024 with the Power Up Tour, its European leg pulled $69.3 million from 7 reported shows, close to $10 million a night. So step back and add it up. AC/DC never owned its master recordings. It does not control its own publishing outright, and it does not even hold its own trademark in its own country. By the usual rock and roll scoreboard, the one where owning the masters is everything, AC/DC should be a cautionary tale. But the opposite is what happened. The band got rich without the thing everyone says a band needs, and the reason is the one asset it never gave up: control. The Youngs controlled the band as a business, hired and fired the managers, and refused, for 50 years, to modernize the sound. That is worth stating twice. The recordings that built ACDC never belonged to ACDC, and the band came out richer than almost anyone who owned theirs. Control, not master ownership, was the moat. The two men who built that control did not live to see the last tours. George, the producer who shaped the whole thing, died in the autumn of 2017 at 70. His brother Malcolm, the rhythm guitarist who was the real engine of the band, had left in 2014 with dementia and died that November at 64. Both architects were gone by the end of that year, and the machine they built just kept grossing. When I started, I asked who owns ACDC. The honest answer is that the band mostly doesn't, and it never needed to. Subscribe if you like watching money traced to its owner. The band that refused to evolve outlasted almost everyone who did.